15 regrets from 15 years of professional podcasting. Thank you for joining me for the Audacity to Podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis. As the Audacity to Podcast celebrates 15 years of professional podcasting, I invite you to take a critical look back at the biggest mistakes I've made and things I wish I did differently with my show and the business around my show. My hope is that this will inspire you to either fix these things early for yourself or avoid them altogether. If you'd like to follow along in the notes for this episode, they're a simple tap or swipe away or at the audacity2podcast.com/15 regrets. And I'll have a bunch of links that you might want to check out in this episode as well. Even though I published the first episode of the Audacity to Podcast 15 years ago now, on June 17th, 2010, I've actually been podcasting longer than that. I published my first ever episode in April 2007, but I consider the Audacity to Podcast to be when I really took podcasting seriously and even professionally. Besides the first and last items on this list, the following regrets are in no particular order. And to keep this episode shorter, I'll let you figure out how to apply each of these to yourself and to your own podcast. But please let me know if you'd like more information about any of these in a future episode. Starting with regret number 1, this is the obvious one you can probably guess, my hiatuses. This is the biggest regret about my podcast. The embarrassingly long hiatuses I've taken. It started in late 2017 when I suddenly disappeared due to a devastating family emergency. And the long times away since then have been multiple shockwaves from my world being turned upside down. But here's what's difficult to confess. I could have returned to the mic sooner, if not for my own head junk. It was a mix of imposter syndrome, self-doubt, unnecessary distractions, some level of perfectionism, self-criticism, and even some fear and laziness. It cost me a lot of opportunities, audience, and influence, and even cost me a lot of income. And even though I mention income, please hear me clearly that I am not bringing back the Audacity to Podcast for money. Instead, I'm finally taking the steps against my negative head junk and stepping back into a burning passion to continue educating and inspiring you. Regret number 2, not building an email list sooner. You probably hear this one so often from entrepreneurs that you're sick of it, but hear me out. This isn't just for marketers and entrepreneurs. Even if you podcast only for the fun of it, there are plenty of great ways that you can use an email list no matter why you're podcasting. I did a whole episode covering many different ways. Go back to episode 198, link in the notes for that if you want to learn more. But for example, you can use an email list to provide actionable information from your podcast episodes to your audience because it's easier to click a link in an email than it is on a podcast. You could get more personal with your audience or solicit feedback you can share in your podcast in an upcoming episode. You could get to know your audience and, yes, even promote things to your audience. Even if you do your podcast only for fun, it is fine to promote things and maybe make some money with those promotions. And speaking of email and promotions, regret number 3, not promoting my episodes via email. I've frequently recommended against using an email list only to promote your latest episodes. Try and give more value than that. But my regret is that I didn't promote my latest episodes in my emails at all. I often think about creating an additional email list solely for the sake of providing my full notes and links to you so you can easily take action on anything that I mention in the podcast, even after you delete the podcast episode from your podcast app. No having to bookmark anything or keep it unplayed until you can take action on it. Something like that where I could just email the notes to you automatically. But I've not even been good at simply including an auto-updating widget in any of my emails. Nothing from my email list or my personal emails. Granted, part of this is because my current email service provider, ActiveCampaign, uses an outdated RSS validator that chokes on valid RSS feeds. The actual podcast RSS feeds with completely valid tags, their validator says, nope, not valid. And so it just doesn't work, or at least the last time I tested it a few months ago. And I still actually haven't corrected this. But please let me know if you'd be interested in receiving my episode notes via email automatically after I publish my episodes. Moving on to regret number 4, pursuing the wrong business. I started the Audacity podcast in 2010 when I was still full-time employed. The job I had was my dream job, but I burned out, largely due to some bad choices on my part. I was looking for an exit, and I had this childhood dream of running my own business. But I didn't see how I could grow a business until after I had already launched the Audacity podcast, because I never intended it to become a business. I just wanted to talk about podcasting. I felt like I had something to say in the space. But then I started connecting the pieces. But I still had the wrong business in mind. Because I was a web designer and many different roles of a designer in my previous job at that time, and I enjoyed designing websites, I thought podcasters need websites and I'll be the guy to make them. But I seriously misjudged the market, especially since there weren't many people who wanted to pay the prices I was charging for completely custom designed websites. I did not want to use the same template on multiple sites. I wanted every site to look completely different so that my portfolio would look different and everyone who gets a site would have something completely custom, unlike anyone else's site. And not many people were interested in that. Maybe if you followed me long enough, maybe you were even interested in hiring me to design a website at one point and decided not to. When I had my last web design client a few years after starting my business full-time, I really didn't want the web design client at that time. It wasn't because of them or the kind of website. It was just the work. I didn't want to do that work. So I quoted them a kind of high price that would make it worth my time. I wasn't trying to rob them or anything like that, but it was high compared to my other quotes that I gave. I was thinking, oh, they'll turn it down. But dang it, they accepted that quote and without any negotiation. Maybe I should have asked for more. I don't know. But I dragged my feet on that project because my heart wasn't in that kind of work anymore. They eventually fired me. And it even, unfortunately, hurt a friendship at that time. But when I got that email telling me I was fired, I was actually relieved. And that is when I realized I couldn't design websites for other people anymore. I shouldn't do it anymore because I dreaded it so much. And I think it was shortly after that narrowing down of my focus for my business that my business started growing much better because it was then the right business for me. And building on top of that, regret number 5, not creating enough training products. Even after I realized the right business for me, I still didn't leverage it enough. I should have created more digital products like courses, ebooks, group coaching, and more, but I didn't. And to this day, I still don't have my own How to Podcast course, which is something I still very much want to create. But the courses I did create, SEO for Podcasters, which was the first ever podcast SEO training, and Zoom H6 for Podcasters, both of those were very well received. And I'm still very happy with their production quality, even though I no longer promote my SEO course because about 1/3 of it or so is outdated. Nonetheless, I could have and should have created much more. I could have created software products too, or hired someone to do them for me, but more on that in a little bit. Regret number 6, waiting too long to register my trademark. Oh, let me tell you my tale of woe. I've claimed and defended the Audacity to Podcast as my own trademark for many years and indicated that with the unregistered trademark symbol. That's the TM, that's superscript after the thing that you're indicating as a trademark. A registered trademark gets to use the R with the circle around that. But if it's not registered, you don't get to use the R with the circle around it. And after more than 10 years of my using that trademark and claiming it as my own trademark and even defending it as a trademark, I finally decided to hire my friend, Gordon Firemark, who, by the way, is one of the very, very, very few people who have ever been a guest on the Audacity to Podcast. So I finally decided to hire him as my business lawyer and to help me officially register the trademark. But after 10 years of my exclusive use, we discovered someone else filed for a very similar trademark only a few months before we did. And sure enough, our two filings were too similar to each other for the United States Patent and Trademark Office, or the USPTO, to grant both of our trademarks. So that began a costly process. The other party's trademark was actually not very good, wasn't very distinctive. And I offered them suggestions and even free consulting so they could not only have a better trademark, but a better launch and a better business overall. But they wouldn't budge. Then my lawyer offered an agreement to coexist, which, as I understand it, would have allowed us to both have our registered trademarks with the understanding that we wouldn't go after each other. But they wouldn't respond to that. I even tried to gently, graciously point out to them several times that I didn't want to go to court, but if we had to go to court, it would be expensive and I would win because I had 10 years of professional usage already. And they had nothing but a temporary website. I didn't point that out to them. Finally, after nearly 4 years, their website disappeared and they stopped renewing their trademark filing, which allowed my own trademark to finally go through. So I was so excited that in January of this year, 2025, the Audacity podcast was finally a registered trademark. Thank you, Gordon, so much for your work with that. And by the way, if you want to hire Gordon, I earn nothing from that. He is legally not allowed to pay me, and yet I still recommend him anyway because he did really good work for me. If you need a trademark or copyright lawyer, definitely work with Gordon Firemark. I have his link in the notes for this, and I earn nothing except maybe a thank you from that because I truly believe in his services. That's why I recommend him, even though I don't get paid. Thankfully, I didn't have any of this trouble, though, when I registered the trademark for Podgagement, and I hired Gordon for that, too. I started that process before I even announced the new name. And that word didn't exist on the internet before I coined it. So that one was really easy and went through rather quickly. But the Audacity podcast took years because I waited too long to actually start the process. So if I could go back into the past, I would have bought more Bitcoin, and I also would have registered the Audacity podcast as soon as I had the money to do it. Maybe if I'd bought more Bitcoin or knew that the Audacity podcast would be a major part of my business. Regret number 7, trying to do things cheaply. Connects nicely to the previous one, doesn't it? Trying to do podcasting things cheaply or free actually cost me a lot. I remember one time wasting several hours, maybe even a couple of days, trying to figure out how to force my MacBook Pro to 1280 by 720 high DPI resolution, because that, in my mind, was and still is the perfect resolution for screen recordings, because it's making the stuff on the screen large enough that people aren't squinting to try and read anything. But also, since it's in high DPI mode or Retina mode, it's actually recording at a much higher resolution. So you get the detail so you can still export that video in 1080p or even a little bit bigger than that. Not fully 4K, but you can still do good things. And you can fit enough most of the time on 1280 by 720. And I wanted my display on my MacBook Pro to be exactly that resolution. And it took me days trying to figure out a way to hack this around because it wasn't just a simple option due to the size of the screen on the MacBook Pro. I could not make it that resolution unless I did all of this hacking and comparing things and digging deep into code to find ID strings and all of this complicated stuff because I did not want to spend $4 on an app that made it a 2-click process. $4, 2 clicks. It would have taken me more clicks to buy the app than to use it. And it took me days to figure out a manual way. And I was thinking, I'll make a video about this. And I realized, no, this is way too complicated to teach anyone else. No one else wants to go through this mess. And I eventually gave up. Even though I got my system working, I gave up and realized I just need to spend the $4 on this. There were other things like that I spent hours hacking together to do what I wanted because I didn't want to spend the money for the solution. Or sometimes, I didn't have the money and I was trying to do things that I couldn't afford to do, both in time and money. But my solutions were not actually cheap or free. Like most free things, put quotation marks around that, they cost time and knowledge. And I think they might have even cost me some brain cells and maybe even grained my hair if I had any hair left. I think ID3 Editor was my first purchase for only $15 that made me realize how much better my workflow could be by investing where I needed it. And it was a simple tool, but it made a lot of things so much easier. By the way, I'm a reseller for ID3 Editor. So if you'd like to buy that program, it's the best program, I think, for tagging your MP3 files with the ID3 tags for full compatibility with a lot of things still do use ID3 tags. If you'd like to purchase that, I have a link on my site for that. I'd love to sell it to you. I'm a reseller, so part of that profit does come to me. This is not an affiliate thing. I have a bunch of licenses I'd love to sell. And if you want to buy all of them, you can. But probably just one is enough. That's at theaudacitytopodcast.com. And yes, sometimes the things that I needed or still need are or were simply too expensive. And so I had to or have to be resourceful. And you're probably in that same place many times. But I've also learned that sometimes it's worth investing in something or someone that will save me a whole lot of time or do things better than I could do them myself. By the way, that's a big reason so many podcasters use Podgagement. It's because of the amount of time it saves them. And just think of mouse clicks alone. Now that Podgagement does a whole lot more than my podcast reviews used to do. The full subscription, if you subscribe to the Constellation tier of Podgagement, it saves you more than 11 million clicks every day. Imagine clicking your mouse 11 million times. Podgagement does all of that for you in seconds. So that saves time. You could maybe try and do some of those things manually, but Podgagement does it so much faster. Podgagement.com if you want to check that out. But moving on. Regret number 8, not publishing more through other channels, including video. I'm not touching the whole video podcasting debate right now, but I definitely regret not publishing more content, original or repurposed, in many places, including, but not only, video. One of the things that held me back was a save it for the podcast mentality, that I felt like any new content ideas I had should be shared first or maybe even exclusively in my podcast. Or I was thinking something like, why should I share this in only a minute when there's so much more people need to know about this? And it just wouldn't be doing it justice to talk about it for only 1 or 2 minutes. And I have so much more to teach about it. So I should just save it for a full episode of the Audacity podcast. That way I can cover it thoroughly. That was, and sometimes still is, my thinking many times. Another thing that held me back was, we could call it my obsession with excellence. That's kind of like one step below perfectionism. I just couldn't stand publishing a video without good lighting and great audio. By the way, it's now so much easier to get both of these things with modern smartphones, and especially to get really good audio with amazing and affordable little microphones like the Hollyland Lark M2S. I love this little thing. I have recommended it so much. At a podcasting conference recently, I recommended it to at least a dozen other people, showed them the little photo of it because it's such a great little wireless microphone that connects to a computer or a smartphone or a tablet or a camera. It can do a lot of things. It's very tiny, very smartly designed. No logos facing on the outside. Its design is very easy to use and intuitive, so people aren't accidentally sticking the brick of the wireless microphone pack outside of their clothing when it's supposed to be inside their clothing. No logos showing. I love this little thing. I've recommended it a lot. And full disclosure, the link in the notes is an affiliate link, so I earn if you purchase through that. And when Hollyland learned how much I loved the microphone and was already recommending it, they actually gave me one as a thank you for how much I've recommended the microphone. And I would have still bought one myself, especially recently when there was an amazing sale on this microphone. So amazing that I had to send it out to everyone on my email list because I love the microphone that much for some of these wireless things. And we're not talking hundreds of dollars, $150 or less than that for this really amazing high quality wireless microphone system. And stuff like that exists now. And now that that's possible to use, you can get much better audio in your mobile videos, run and gun style videos and things like that. But I wasn't thinking about stuff like that or didn't have those kinds of options back then. And so I simply didn't do a lot of things that I could have done back then. And there was, and still is, some disdain for how some platforms work. For example, I still abhor how TikTok mirrors video recorded into it, so everything looks backwards. And I hated how many platforms would let you record for only seconds at a time, requiring lots of stops and starts or disjointed phrases. And of course, I hated vertical video. But I look back at all the profit Profit. That's not just a spelling lesson. That stands for popularity, relationships, opportunities, fun, income, or tangibles. And all of that I missed by not publishing in more places and putting the content out there and serving more podcasters in more places and in more ways. I regret that. Regret number 9, not reaching out to press about significant things. I live near Cincinnati and I've gotten press only once, and it wasn't even for my own accomplishments. I was featured in the Cincinnati Business Courier and on local TV talking about podcasting because International Podcast Day was coming up, and I'm one of the co-founders and organizers of it. But they didn't really focus all that much on me, and the interview that they played on TV was a bit rough. They didn't work the audio the way that I told them they should. And even in the interview, you know that cliche thing you sometimes see, and he said, "It's amazing." And then they switched to the person saying, "It's amazing." That's basically what they did with the interview. He says this, and it cuts to me saying exactly what they just said I said. But nonetheless, besides that, I didn't try for any coverage when several of my podcasts were nominated for awards. And I didn't try for any coverage both times the Audacity to Podcast won the People's Choice Podcast Awards. And thank you so much if you supported me in those podcast awards. I really, really deeply appreciate it. I did try for coverage when I was inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame, but I obviously didn't try hard enough because I didn't get any coverage. I regret not being more proactive about these things when they were most timely. Regret number 10, accepting sponsors. Did you know that I had some sponsors many years ago? I accepted them because I saw the income potential, which wasn't all that much, but I was kind of desperate for income back then. But now I regret it because I should have focused more on creating and selling my own stuff, which would have been much more profitable. I'm not saying I'll never again have sponsors on the Audacity to Podcast, but those past sponsors weren't even podcasting related. For many years, I've said that I actually can't afford to have sponsors on my podcast. The cost is too dang high. In fact, I would rather read out gift notes from you than getting paid to promote some other business. So, by the way, if you'd like to support what I do with the Audacity to Podcast, then I have a link in the notes, or go to the audacity2podcast.com/giveback so that you can give back whatever value you feel the Audacity to Podcast is worth to you. And if I do someday have sponsors on the Audacity to Podcast, you can bet they would be totally podcasting related. But again, I'm not sure I really want sponsors. Regret number 11, not creating value for value opportunities for you, my audience. This goes along really well with that sponsors thing. I regret not embracing value for value, or sometimes called V for V, with a number 4 in the middle. Comedy Forecast would be so proud of that. I regret not embracing that philosophy years ago. And I call it a philosophy because this is not a Bitcoin thing. It's not even a Podcasting 2.0 thing. Instead, it is a philosophy, a worldview, you could even call it. It's a way of thinking that goes somewhat like this. I'm giving you value through my podcast. And in the Audacity to Podcast case, that's education, maybe some entertainment, inspiration, and such. And I can provide opportunities for you to consider what that is worth to you so that you can give some of that value back. You're giving value back for the value I give you. Or you could say that I give you something of value, hoping that you will give value in return. That's why it's called value for value, coined by the guy who invented podcasting, Adam Curry, the Podfather. I did value for value, kind of, for my other podcasts, but my big reason for not including it on the Audacity to Podcast is that I always felt it would undermine my business or my calls to action for things, because I have actual things to sell, especially like Podgagement. That is my main business thing that I sell right now. And sometimes I think I'd rather you go buy that from me and buy an actual product than give me money for the free podcast. But see, that's the wrong perspective, because I am giving something of value. And it took years for me to really embrace this concept. And the Podcasting 2.0 revolution really opened my eyes to this, especially when I did an episode exploring the true worth of value for value when I was talking about micropayments back in episode 371. That value in value for value is community, relationships, and reciprocity. That's why I now, or at least when I remember to, promote ways you can support the value I give you through the Audacity podcast by giving back any amount you feel the podcast is worth. And you could do that through the audacitytopodcast.com/give back, or you can do that through a modern Podcasting 2.0 app by streaming or sending boosted grams with Satoshis, which are small portions of Bitcoin. But you don't have to. But if you want to, I'm providing the way for you to do that, whatever you feel the podcast is worth to you, or buy the things that I actually outright sell. Regret number 12, working solo for too long. I very much have the superhero syndrome that Chris Ducker described in his book, Virtual Freedom. I recommend that book. I've got a link to it in the notes. That is an affiliate link, but I read it a long time ago and it really impacted me positively. It helped me to realize that I wanted to do everything in my business. And to set aside modesty for a moment, I was pretty good at most of it. But it took me a while to discover, and especially the book, that I could buy back my time. And that reminds me of the title of another book that I recommend on the same subject. It's called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. I'll have a link to that in the notes too. So it took me a while to realize that I could buy back my time by paying someone else to do the things I didn't want to do, or the things I couldn't do, or the things I shouldn't do. In fact, it was Chris Ducker's book, Virtual Freedom, that inspired me so much to finally hire someone to build for me the thing that I wanted to build for a couple of years. And that was back in 2013 and then launched in 2014, my podcast reviews, which is now rebuilt into Podgagement. That's the most valuable thing my business sells right now. And it all started by my realizing that I shouldn't be working solo like this. I also discovered the freedom it brought when I hired a podcast editor and my first personal assistant in my business. Before these things, I was definitely working solo for too long. And it's funny that while I was preparing this episode, and without his even knowing what this episode was going to be about, my podcast editor, John Buchanan, coined the term entrepreneur. Try and say that fast. Just one time, try and say it fast. He defines it as this: a person who independently produces every aspect of their podcast from start to finish, recording, editing, promoting, booking guests, uploading, and managing the show without any outside help. That is entrepreneur. I love that. That's perfect. And if you like that too, please show it some love. This is in Urban Dictionary now. So I've got the link to that. Show John Buchanan some love by upvoting that definition on Urban Dictionary. I don't think you even have to have an account on the site to vote that definition up, but I've got the link in the notes for this episode. So please show him some love over there. And that is so true. I understand sometimes that's just, we do everything and that's all that we want to do. And maybe we can't afford these other things. But in my own business and my professional podcasting, this was a regret that I worked solo for so long. That freedom, when I hired someone else to do some of these things for me, was so wonderful. And anytime I get to do that kind of thing again, it feels so great to delegate it to someone else who can do it for me, sometimes even doing it better than I could. There's freedom in that. Regret number 13. Using a cute and expensive domain. I don't completely regret the name The Audacity to Podcast, especially now that it's my registered trademark. But I do regret the domain I got for the podcast network that I launched at the same time as I was launching The Audacity to Podcast, bringing my total number of active podcasts at that time to 3, which meant I had to have a network, right? Because if you get that many podcasts, you have to start your own network. Oh, no, you don't. But that's what I was thinking. But it was a bigger part of my vision for my business, my professional podcasting strategy, to have that network. And I went for a cute domain because I saw people using things like .tv, .io, .ly, or having really creative stuff like the webpage bookmark service Delicious. If you don't remember what that is, maybe ask your parents. I don't know. But for a while, their domain was del.icio.us. So that is the word delicious with some dots in the middle. The way I'd always remember how to spell it out and type it is, in my mind, I would say del.icio.us. Delicious. Well, now it's delicious.com. And for me, with my podcast network, unfortunately, that cute domain that I had in mind back then and used was expensive. For the renewals, I didn't purchase it from someone else. The renewals were expensive. And since I hate letting domains go that I've ever spoken publicly, I have to pay that expensive renewal fee every year for the rest of my life. Well, in my mind at least. Several years after I already started the network, then I realized a much cheaper and even more understandable domain. So I switched to that domain, I think only a year or two before I just shut down the network. Bitly is another example of this, by the way. Their domain used to be bit.ly, but it's now simply bitly.com, bitly.com. Regret number 14, getting involved with the wrong people. I'm not going to name names here, but I've gotten involved with some bad people in the past, and it turned out to cost me dearly in my professional and podcasting endeavors. I'm actually still suffering repercussions from some of them. I wish that I'd never pursued those things that I thought were great opportunities, even though I did have concerns, because my concerns ended up being proven true. And what really frustrates me about my mistakes is that when some of these things started crashing down, especially one particular thing, I took them way too personally and failed to stand up as strong as I should have and fight for the right things. Lesson learned, never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. Regret number 15, building on that previous one, but also kind of a flip side of it. But this is certainly not the least of my regrets. Not focusing more on relationships. I wish that I had focused more on relationships with people. While this certainly has heavy ramifications outside of podcasting, and I might do an episode about that someday in the future, I'm referring strictly to my professional and podcasting pursuits in this context. While I see others building a bunch of relationships, I've often spent more time on the content than on the people. Like with the Audacity to Podcast, you've rarely heard me talk about my personal life or share personal things that help you to get to know me as a person and what I like outside of podcasting, unless they somehow totally relate to the subject at hand. The main reason for that is that I have this idea stuck in my mind that you're not here for me. I could even say you don't care for me. And I'll put that in quotation marks. You don't care for me, but you're here for what I teach. And so I self-filter out a lot of stuff because I want to give you the content I promise to give you. And that is podcasting, education, and inspiration, the guts, the tools, and all of that stuff that's part of my slogan. But despite that, I still remember how many men and women did feel they had relationships enough with me that they were there for me a few years ago when I went through a very, very difficult time in my life. Countless people prayed for me and with me, sent me notes of encouragement, checked in with me, and more. I especially remember a podcast movement I attended while my emotional wounds were still very much bleeding. Mark Deal from Atlanta made it a point to give me a hug every day of the conference. And that meant a whole lot to me because I needed every one of those hugs. But I didn't learn until later that he's actually not a hugger. He actually does not enjoy giving hugs, but he knew that I needed those hugs. Wow. And Emily Prokop sent me some encouraging voicemails. One was just a kind of, I'm there for you. Don't give up. Don't lose hope. You're special. I care about you. And encouraging like that. And the other voicemail was, she specifically said, save this for when you're ready to hear it. It was a kind of, get your butt back to work. You're good at what you do. You need to do more of it kind of thing. And both were very encouraging and very much what I needed to hear. And at that same podcast movement, she was the only person. I was very much trying to hold it together at the conference, hold it together emotionally and not cry and everything. But she was the only person who broke through the shell that I was keeping around myself at that time because of her warm kindness and compassion. And she made me cry. Not like she was trying to make me cry. She wasn't mean. It was because of her kindness and compassion. And as a odd side note as another part of this. I even debated naming these people, but I can't quite explain why that was even a debate in my mind. Because I thought, I need to focus more on the content, not so much the relationships. But relationships are important, and they're even part of profit, P-R-O-F-I-T. It's the second one in there, relationships. And I regret not focusing more on relationships. And I've lost plenty of relationships over the years, especially these past few years. Some of those are my fault. Some are the faults of others, despite my attempts at friendship, and some are from misunderstandings and false judgments. So there you have it. 15 regrets from 15 years of professional podcasting through the Audacity to Podcast. I hope that you can learn, and it's okay if you want to laugh at my mistakes so that you won't make the same ones. Because in everything I do through my podcast and in my business, I want to, you know it's coming, I want to give you the guts and teach you the tools so that you can start and grow your own podcast for passion and profit. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast.com. And if you have been with me through the hiatuses, through the mistakes, and especially if you've been with me for the last 15 years of this podcast, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks for listening.